The bullet had torn through Jacob Hawthorne's side just as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks. And now, as he lay bleeding into the Missouri dust, he was certain these would be his final moments on Earth. The pain had become something distant, a dull roar that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Jacob's vision blurred and sharpened in turns as he stared up at the darkening sky above Wyatt, Missouri, watching clouds drift past like lazy cattle. He had been riding hard from Kansas City with a pouch of money meant for his family's struggling ranch when the bandits had appeared on the trail. There had been 3 of them, maybe 4. He could not remember now. What he remembered was the flash of gunfire, his horse rearing in panic, and then the ground rushing up to meet him as he tumbled from the saddle. His horse had bolted, taking with it his canteen, his supplies, and any hope of making it back to town. The bandits had taken the money pouch and left him for dead on the side of the dusty road, 3 miles outside of Wyatt. That had been hours ago, or perhaps only minutes. Time had become as slippery as water through cupped hands. Jacob pressed his hand against the wound, feeling the warm stickiness of blood seeping between his fingers. He was 26 years old, and he had survived the war, survived cattle drives through hostile territory, survived more bar fights than he cared to count. But this seemed to be the end of the line. The irony was not lost on him. After everything, he would die alone on a nameless stretch of road, his body to be found days later by some passing traveler or picked clean by vultures. He thought of his mother, who had passed 2 winters ago. He thought of his father, broken and bitter after losing the woman he loved. He thought of his younger sister, Mary, who depended on the money he had been bringing home to keep their small ranch afloat. What would happen to her now? The thought brought more pain than the bullet wound. The sky above him had turned the color of a fresh bruise, purple and deep blue bleeding together. Jacob's breathing had become shallow, each inhale a monumental effort. His limbs felt heavy, as though someone had filled them with wet sand. This was it then. This was how Jacob Hawthorne would meet his maker. He closed his eyes, ready to surrender to the darkness that pulled at him like an undertow. His mother used to say that death was just another door, another threshold to cross. He hoped she was right. He hoped there was something waiting on the other side, something better than bleeding out on a Missouri roadside in the autumn of 1877. But then he heard it, the sound of wheels creaking, of hooves clopping steadily against packed earth. Jacob's eyes fluttered open, though even that small movement cost him dearly. Was he imagining it? Had his mind conjured the sounds of rescue in his final moments? The wagon came into view, pulled by a single dappled mare. Sitting on the bench seat was a woman, alone, her dark hair pulled back beneath a simple bonnet. She wore a practical gray dress, dusty from travel, and when she caught sight of him lying in the road, she pulled the reins with such force that the mare whinnied in protest. "Lord, have mercy," the woman said, and her voice cut through the fog in Jacob's mind like a church bell. She was off the wagon in an instant, her skirts kicking up dust as she ran toward him. Jacob tried to speak, tried to warn her that he was done for, that she should not waste her time, but his mouth would not cooperate. All that came out was a weak gasp. The woman dropped to her knees beside him, her hands immediately going to his wound. Her face was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with strong features and eyes the color of amber in firelight. There was no hesitation in her movements, no feminine squeamishness at the sight of blood. She assessed the damage with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen injury before. "You are not dying today," she said firmly, as though she could command death itself to stand down through sheer force of will. "Not if I have anything to say about it." She tore a strip of fabric from her petticoat without ceremony, wadding it up and pressing it against his wound. The pressure sent a fresh wave of agony through Jacob's body, and he groaned despite himself. "I know it hurts," she said, her voice softer now, but no less determined. "But I need to stop this bleeding, and then I need to get you into my wagon. Can you help me at all? Can you move?" Jacob wanted to tell her that he could not, that his body had become a useless thing, but something in her voice, in the absolute certainty that he would not die, stirred something in him. Some stubborn part of him that had survived the war, that had survived every hardship life had thrown his way, suddenly refused to give up. "I can try," he managed to rasp, his voice barely more than a whisper. "That is all I ask," she said, and there was approval in her tone. Getting him into the wagon was an ordeal that blurred together in Jacob's memory afterward. He remembered the woman's surprising strength as she half carried, half dragged him. He remembered the way she spoke to him continuously, keeping him anchored to consciousness with her steady stream of words. "My name is Penelope Ellis," she said as she maneuvered him onto the wagon bed. "I am a nurse. Well, I trained as one during the war, though I was just a girl then. I have been living in Springfield, but I am traveling to Wyatt to tend to my aunt, who has fallen ill. Lucky for you, I happen to be passing through at just the right moment. Or perhaps it is Providence. Do you believe in Providence, Cowboy?" Jacob could not answer. He was too focused on trying to breathe, on trying to stay present even as his body screamed for him to let go. Penelope worked with quick, confident hands, tearing away his blood-soaked shirt to get a better look at the wound. "The bullet went clean through," she said, speaking more to herself than to him now. "That is good. Nothing lodged inside to fester, but you have lost a lot of blood, and we need to get you somewhere clean where I can properly tend to this." She climbed back onto the wagon bench and snapped the reins. The mare started forward at a trot that sent jolts of pain through Jacob's body with every bump in the road, but he bit down on his groans. Penelope glanced back at him frequently, her face set with concentration. "Stay with me," she called back to him. "We are only about 3 miles from Wyatt. There is a doctor there, is there not?" "Doc Thornton," Jacob managed to gasp out. "East end of town, above the general store." "Good man," Penelope said. "You just keep talking to me. Tell me your name." Jacob Hawthorne." "Well, Jacob Hawthorne, you are doing just fine. Tell me about yourself. What were you doing out on this road alone?" It was hard to form words, hard to think past the pain, but Jacob understood what she was doing. She was keeping him conscious, keeping him engaged. He had seen field surgeons do the same thing during the war, talking to wounded men to keep them from slipping away. "Bringing money home," he said, each word an effort. "For my sister, for our ranch." "A good brother, then," Penelope said. "Your sister will be glad to see you, even without the money. Family is worth more than gold, is it not?" Jacob wanted to agree, but the darkness was pulling at him again, more insistent now. His eyes drifted closed despite his best efforts to keep them open. "Jacob!" Penelope's voice cut through the fog like a whip crack. Do not you dare leave me now. We are almost there. I can see the town lights ahead. Just a little longer." He forced his eyes open, focusing on the back of her head, on the wisps of dark hair that had escaped her bonnet. She sat straight-backed on the wagon bench, driving the mare with the skill of someone born to the frontier. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? Why was she so determined to save a stranger? The lights of Wyatt came into view, blurred and swimming in Jacob's vision. He could hear Penelope shouting now, calling for help, for the doctor. There were voices, hands lifting him, the sensation of being carried. Through it all, he could hear Penelope's voice, steady and sure, giving instructions to whoever would listen. "Bullet wound through and through. He has lost a lot of blood. We need clean water, bandages, whiskey if you have it. Someone fetch the doctor immediately." Jacob found himself on a bed, surrounded by lamplight. He recognized the room dimly as Doc Thornton's surgery, a place he had been once before when a horse had kicked him in the ribs. The doctor's weathered face swam into view, and then Penelope was there too, pushing up her sleeves. "I can assist," she was telling the doctor. "I trained as a nurse during the war." Doc Thornton, to his credit, did not argue. "Then hold him down while I clean this wound. This is going to hurt like hell, son." It did hurt. It hurt worse than the bullet itself, worse than anything Jacob had ever felt. He tried to hold still, tried to be brave, but his body arched against the pain as the doctor poured whiskey into the wound. Penelope's hands were on his shoulders, holding him firm, and her face hovered above his. "Look at me," she commanded, and Jacob did, focusing on those amber eyes. "Breathe with me, in and out. That is right. You are doing so well. Just a little more." Her voice became his anchor, the only real thing in a world of pain. He fixed his gaze on her face, on the determined set of her jaw, on the way a few dark tendrils of hair framed her cheeks. She was beautiful, he realized distantly, not in the delicate ornamental way of the girls who had flirted with him at church socials, but in a strong, vital way that spoke of substance and character. Time passed in fragments. The doctor stitched him up, while Penelope held his hand, her grip firm and warm. Someone brought water, and she helped him drink, supporting his head with surprising gentleness. At some point, the doctor declared the immediate danger past, and left to tend to other business, but Penelope remained. "You should rest," Jacob told her, his voice hoarse. The worst of the pain had subsided into a deep, throbbing ache. "You have done enough, more than enough. I will rest when I am certain you will not take a fever," Penelope said, settling into a chair beside the bed. "Infection is often more dangerous than the initial injury." "Your aunt," Jacob said, suddenly remembering. "You were traveling to see her." "My aunt will keep for one more day," Penelope said with a wave of her hand. "She has a cold, nothing more serious. My mother tends to dramatics in her letters, but you, Jacob Hawthorne, nearly died on that road. If I had come along even an hour later, you would be with your maker by now." The casual way she said it sent a chill through him, because he knew it was true. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt woefully inadequate. "You saved my life." "Yes, I did," Penelope agreed with no false modesty. "And now you owe me the courtesy of staying alive, so my efforts are not wasted." Despite everything, despite the pain and the exhaustion and the lingering closeness of death, Jacob felt his lips twitch into something like a smile. "Yes, madam, I will do my best." "See that you do," Penelope said, but her stern words were softened by the hint of warmth in her eyes. Jacob drifted in and out of consciousness through the long night. Each time he surfaced, Penelope was there, keeping watch. Sometimes she pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. Sometimes she helped him drink water. Sometimes she simply sat in silence, her presence a steady comfort in the darkness. As dawn light began to filter through the surgery window, Jacob woke to find her sleeping in the chair beside his bed. Her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, her hands still resting on the edge of his mattress. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her dress rumpled and stained with his blood. She had stayed with him all night, this stranger who had appeared on the road like an angel sent to pull him back from death's door. Something stirred in Jacob's chest, something that had nothing to do with his injury. He studied her face in the soft morning light, memorizing the slope of her nose, the curve of her cheek, the way her lips parted slightly in sleep. Who was Penelope Ellis? What kind of woman drove alone across Missouri to tend to an aunt? What kind of woman stopped without hesitation to save a dying stranger? He wanted to know everything about her. He wanted to understand what had forged that steel in her spine, what had taught her to look at a man bleeding to death and refuse to accept defeat. He wanted to hear her voice again, wanted to see that spark of determination in her amber eyes. The realization hit him with surprising force. He, Jacob Hawthorne, who had sworn off women after watching his father fall apart at his mother's death, who had told himself that a wandering cowboy had no business thinking about love or family, wanted to know this woman, wanted to be near her, wanted to be worthy of the life she had fought so hard to preserve. Penelope stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked disoriented, and then her gaze found Jacob and sharpened with concern. "You are awake," she said, sitting up straight and immediately reaching to feel his forehead. "How do you feel? Are you in pain? Do you have fever?" "I feel like I was shot and spent the night in hell," Jacob said honestly, "but I am alive, thanks to you." "No fever?" Penelope said with satisfaction, pulling her hand back. "That is a good sign. We still need to watch for infection over the next few days, but you may have escaped the worst of it." "You stayed all night?" Jacob said. "Of course I did," Penelope replied, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Someone needed to ensure you did not die in your sleep after all the trouble I went through to save you." "I think you like saving people," Jacob observed. Something flickered across Penelope's face, something that might have been old pain or memory. "Someone should," she said quietly. "The world is hard enough without good people dying before their time." Before Jacob could respond, the door opened and Doc Thornton entered, looking tired but pleased. "Well, well," the old doctor said, moving to Jacob's side. "You are still with us, Hawthorne. That is a good sign. Let me take a look at those stitches." The examination was mercifully brief. Doc Thornton declared himself satisfied with the wound's appearance and praised Penelope's assistance. "You have good hands, young lady," he told her. "If you ever decide to settle in Wyatt, I could use a partner in this practice. These old bones are not getting any younger." "That is kind of you to say," Penelope said with a smile that transformed her tired face. "But I have commitments in Springfield." Jacob felt an unexpected pang of disappointment at her words. Of course she had a life elsewhere. Of course she would leave Wyatt as soon as her business here was done. Why should she stay for a cowboy she had found bleeding on the road? You need to rest and recover, Doc Thornton told Jacob. No riding, no heavy work for at least 2 weeks. That wound needs time to heal properly, or you risk tearing it open again. Where are you staying? Do you have family in town? My ranch is about 5 miles west of here, Jacob said. I live there with my sister, Mary. Someone should send word to her, Penelope said immediately. She will be worried when you do not return home. I will have my assistant ride out there this morning, Doc Thornton said. But you, young man, are not going anywhere for at least a few days. I want to keep an eye on that wound. I can stay here, Jacob said. I do not want to be any more trouble. Nonsense, came a new voice from the doorway. Mrs. Brennan, the banker's wife and the unofficial social organizer of Wyatt, swept into the room with the authority of a general marshaling troops. We cannot have our local hero recovering in a surgery. Jacob, you will stay at my boarding house. I have a perfectly good room on the ground floor, and I will not hear any arguments. Jacob knew better than to argue with Mrs. Brennan. The woman had a heart of gold, but she also had a will of iron, and once she decided something, it was as good as done. And you, Miss Ellis, Mrs. Brennan continued, turning to Penelope. I understand you were on your way to visit your aunt, Mrs. Florence Ellis on Maple Street? Yes, Penelope said, looking slightly overwhelmed by the older woman's energy. How did you know? Dear girl, this is Wyatt. Everyone knows everything. Your aunt is doing just fine, by the way. I stopped by to check on her this morning when I heard about the excitement. Just a head cold, nothing serious. But you must be exhausted. Come along to the boarding house with our patient. I insist you take a room and get some proper rest. After what you did for Jacob, it is the least this town can do. And so it was settled, despite Jacob's protests and Penelope's attempts at polite refusal. Within the hour, Jacob found himself installed in a comfortable room at Mrs. Brennan's boarding house, his wound freshly dressed and strict instructions to rest. Penelope had been given the room across the hall, and Mrs. Brennan had promised to bring them both breakfast shortly. Jacob lay in the soft bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind refusing to quiet despite his body's exhaustion. Across the hall, Penelope was probably sleeping, finally getting the rest she so richly deserved. He wondered what she was dreaming about. He wondered if she ever thought about him at all, or if he was just another patient, another stranger she had helped. He must have dozed off despite himself, because when he next opened his eyes, the light had shifted and someone was knocking softly on his door. Come in, he called, his voice rough with sleep. The door opened to reveal Mary, his younger sister, her face streaked with tears. She was 19, with their mother's blonde hair and their father's blue eyes, and right now she looked terrified. Jacob, she breathed, rushing to his bedside. When Doc Thornton's man came to tell me what happened, I thought I had lost you. I thought I was alone. Hey now, Jacob said gently, reaching up to squeeze her hand, despite the way the movement pulled at his stitches. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. You could have died, Mary said, and her voice cracked on the words. Just like Mama, just like Papa will probably drink himself to death within the year. I cannot lose you too, Jacob. I cannot. You are not going to lose me, Jacob promised, though the words felt heavy with the memory of how close he had come. I am too stubborn to die, remember? And I had help. There was a woman, Mary. She found me on the road and brought me back. If not for her, well, you would be right. Mary wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. Mrs. Brennan told me about her. A nurse from Springfield. Everyone in town is talking about it. They are calling her an angel. She might as well be, Jacob said. I have never seen anything like it. She just appeared out of nowhere and refused to let me die. I want to thank her, Mary said firmly. Where is she? Across the hall, I think. But Mary, she is probably resting. She was up all night watching over me. Then I will thank her later, Mary said. Jacob, what about the money? The money you were bringing home for the cattle purchase. Jacob's heart sank. He had been trying not to think about that. The bandits took it, all of it. I am sorry, Mary. I failed you. Failed me! Mary looked at him incredulously. Jacob, you are alive. That is all that matters. We will figure out the rest. We always do. But Jacob knew it was not that simple. Their ranch was struggling. had been struggling since their mother died and their father gave up. They needed that money to buy cattle, to have something to sell come spring. Without it, they might lose the ranch entirely. He had failed in his duty as the man of the family, and now his sister would pay the price. "Do not look like that," Mary said, reading his expression. "We will find a way. We always do. Right now, you just need to heal." She stayed for another hour, filling him in on news from the ranch, carefully avoiding any mention of their father's drinking. When she finally left, promising to return the next day, Jacob felt the weight of responsibility settling back onto his shoulders. He could not afford to lie in bed recovering. There was too much to do, too much at stake. But when he tried to sit up, pain lanced through his side with such intensity that he gasped and fell back against the pillows. Perhaps he would need to stay put for a little while after all. Another knock came at his door, softer this time. "Come in," Jacob called. Penelope entered, and Jacob was struck again by her presence. She had changed into a fresh dress, a simple blue calico, and had pinned her dark hair up in a neat bun. She looked well rested now, the exhaustion gone from her face, and when she smiled at him, Jacob felt his breath catch in his chest. "I heard your sister was here," Penelope said. "I did not want to intrude, but I wanted to check on you. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Jacob admitted, "but better than I have any right to be, thanks to you." Penelope moved to his bedside, with that same easy confidence she had shown the night before. "May I check your bandages? I want to make sure there is no fresh bleeding." "Of course," Jacob said, and he tried not to react as she carefully pulled back the blanket and lifted his nightshirt to examine the wound. Her touch was clinical, professional, but Jacob felt heat rise in his face nonetheless. "It looks good," Penelope pronounced, her fingers gentle as she probed the edges of the bandage. "No signs of infection, no excessive swelling. You are healing well." "All thanks to my guardian angel," Jacob said, and then immediately felt foolish for saying something so sentimental. But Penelope did not seem bothered by it. She pulled his nightshirt back down and met his eyes with a slight smile. "I am no angel, Jacob Hawthorne, just a woman who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Do you do this often?" Jacob asked. "Rescue dying cowboys?" "You are my first dying cowboy," Penelope said, settling into the chair beside his bed. "Though I have treated plenty of injuries in my time. During the war, I lied about my age to volunteer as a nurse. I was only 14, but I was tall for my age and mature looking, and they needed all the help they could get. I saw things, Jacob, terrible things. Boys younger than you, dying from wounds that could have been prevented with proper care. I swore then that I would never walk past someone who needed help, no matter the circumstances." Jacob absorbed this, trying to imagine Penelope as a 14-year-old girl working in a war hospital. That must have been hard, seeing all that death and suffering so young. "It was," Penelope said simply. "But it also taught me what I was capable of. It taught me that I did not have to be helpless in the face of suffering. I could do something. I could make a difference, even if it was just for one person at a time." "Like me," Jacob said softly. "Like you," Penelope agreed. "Though I must say, you were more cooperative than most of my patients. Many men act like babies at the first sign of pain." "I will not tell anyone, but I felt like crying several times," Jacob admitted with a small laugh that made his side ache. "That is called being human," Penelope said. "There is no shame in it." They talked for a long time after that, the conversation flowing easily despite their short acquaintance. Jacob learned that Penelope had grown up in St. Louis, that her father was a doctor who had encouraged her unconventional interest in medicine, that her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn son when Penelope was 12. He told her about his own mother's death from pneumonia, about his father's descent into alcoholism and despair, about the responsibility of trying to keep the ranch afloat while Mary was still so young. "It sounds like you carry a heavy burden," Penelope observed. "Does anyone help you bear it?" "Mary does what she can," Jacob said. "But she is still just a girl in many ways, and my father, well, he is no help at all. Mostly I just try to keep moving forward and hope that is enough." "That is no way to live," Penelope said gently. "Always moving, never resting. Everyone needs help sometimes, Jacob. There is no shame in admitting that." "Says the woman who does everything herself," Jacob pointed out. "I did not say I was good at taking my own advice," Penelope said with a rueful smile. "After the war, I trained properly as a nurse in St. Louis. I could have stayed there, worked at a hospital, had a respectable career. But I wanted to go where I was needed most, so I moved to Springfield and opened a small clinic for people who could not afford a regular doctor, farm workers, immigrant families, people who fell through the cracks. It does not pay well, but it matters. That is remarkable, Jacob said, and he meant it. Most people would choose comfort over purpose. Most people are not me, Penelope said simply, and there was no arrogance in the statement, just fact. Over the next few days, a pattern developed. Penelope would check on Jacob's wound each morning and evening, changing his bandages with practiced efficiency. Between these medical visits, they would talk for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their dreams, their fears. Jacob found himself looking forward to her visits with an intensity that surprised him. The hours when she was gone, visiting her aunt or running errands in town, seemed to drag endlessly. Mary noticed, of course. On her third visit to the boarding house, she caught Jacob staring at the door for the 100th time, clearly waiting for Penelope to appear. "You like her," Mary said with the bluntness of a younger sister. "I do not know what you mean," Jacob said, but he could feel heat creeping up his neck. "Please," Mary said, rolling her eyes. "You watch the door like a puppy waiting for its owner to come home. And you smile more when she is around than I have seen you smile in years. It is obvious." "Even if I did like her, it would not matter," Jacob said. "She has a life in Springfield, a clinic, a purpose. What do I have to offer? A struggling ranch and a family in shambles?" "You have yourself," Mary said firmly, "and that is worth more than you think. Besides, have you considered that maybe she likes you too? I have seen the way she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching." "You are imagining things," Jacob said, but hope kindled in his chest despite himself. "Am I?" Mary asked with a knowing smile. "Why do you think she is still in Wyatt? Her aunt recovered from that cold days ago. There is no reason for her to stay, except that she wants to." Jacob wanted to believe his sister, but he had learned not to trust hope too easily. Life had taught him that good things were often temporary, that happiness could be snatched away without warning. Better to protect his heart than to risk it on something that could never work. But that evening, when Penelope came to change his bandages, Jacob found his resolve wavering. She was telling him a story about a patient in Springfield, an old farmer who had been convinced that his illness was caused by a curse from a rival, and her eyes sparkled with humor as she recounted the man's elaborate theories. "So I finally told him," Penelope said, barely containing her laughter, "that the only curse affecting him was the curse of eating nothing but salted pork and whiskey for 3 months straight. He needed vegetables and water, not an exorcism." "Did he listen?" Jacob asked, grinning despite himself. "Eventually," Penelope said, after his wife threatened to leave him if he did not. "It is amazing what motivation a good woman can provide." She fell silent then, and something in the air between them shifted. Her hands stilled on his bandage, and when Jacob looked up, he found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Your wound is healing very well," Penelope said softly. "You will be back to full strength soon." "Thanks to you," Jacob said. "I owe you my life, Penelope. I do not know how I could ever repay that debt." "You owe me nothing," Penelope said, but she did not look away. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," Jacob said firmly, "not anyone. You. You stopped when others would have passed by. You fought for me when I had given up. You stayed when you could have left. That was not just anyone. That was you." Penelope's cheeks colored slightly, and Jacob realized with a start that she was not as immune to him as she pretended to be. The thought emboldened him. "Why are you still here?" he asked quietly. "Your aunt is well. I am healing. You could return to Springfield, to your clinic, but you stay." "Why?" Penelope looked down at her hands, and for the first time since Jacob had met her, she seemed uncertain. "I tell myself it is to ensure you recover fully," she said, "that I need to monitor your wound for infection. But that is not entirely true, is it?" "What is the truth?" Jacob asked, hardly daring to breathe. Penelope lifted her eyes to his, and in them he saw vulnerability, fear, and something that made his heart race. "The truth is that I do not want to leave," she said. "The truth is that I think about you when I am not here. The truth is that I have spent years building walls around myself, telling myself that I did not need anyone, that my work was enough. And then I found you bleeding on that road, and something shifted. I cannot explain it, Jacob. I do not fully understand it myself. Jacob reached out and took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. I know exactly what you mean, he said, because I feel it too. From the moment I saw you lean over me, refusing to let me die, something changed. You pulled me back from the edge, Penelope, but not just from death, from something worse, from the belief that I had to face everything alone, that caring for someone was just setting myself up for pain. I am scared, Penelope admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I have seen what loss does to people. I watched my father after my mother died. I saw soldiers who lost the women they loved. I swore I would never let myself be that vulnerable. I know, Jacob said. I watched my father fall apart after my mother passed. I told myself I would never risk that kind of pain. But Penelope, I am learning that some risks are worth taking. You taught me that. When you refused to give up on me, when you fought for my life even though I was a stranger, you showed me that sometimes you have to believe in something better, even when it is hard. Penelope's fingers tightened around his. What are you saying, Jacob? I am saying, do not go back to Springfield, Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. Or, if you do, let me come with you. I am saying that, in the few days I have known you, you have become more important to me than I thought possible. I am saying that I want to know everything about you. I want to hear your stories and your laugh. I want to be the person you talk to at the end of a long day. I want to build something with you, if you will let me. Tears shimmered in Penelope's eyes, but she was smiling. Your timing is terrible, she said, with a watery laugh. You are injured and flat on your back. This is hardly the romantic declaration I might have imagined. Life does not wait for perfect moments, Jacob said. Trust me, I learned that when I was bleeding out on a Missouri road. We take the moments we are given and we make them count. Penelope leaned down, and Jacob met her halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, full of promise and fear and hope all tangled together. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. I do not know how this will work, Penelope said. My clinic, your ranch, our lives are in different places. Then we figure it out, Jacob said simply. Together. If you are willing to take a chance on a cowboy with more problems than solutions. I think I proved I was willing to take a chance on you when I picked you up off that road, Penelope said, and this time when she smiled, it was radiant. But Jacob, I need you to understand something. I cannot give up my work, helping people, healing them. It is not just what I do, it is who I am. I would never ask you to, Jacob said fiercely. Your strength, your purpose, your refusal to be anything other than exactly who you are, those are the things I love about you. The word hung in the air between them, weighty and significant. Jacob had not meant to say it, not so soon, but now that it was out, he could not take it back. Did not want to take it back. Love? Penelope repeated softly. Is it too soon to say that? Jacob asked. Maybe, probably. But I have learned not to waste time on pretending or playing games. I nearly died, Penelope. That changes a man. It makes him realize that life is too short to hide what he feels. No, Penelope said, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. It is not too soon, because I think I might love you too, Jacob Hawthorne, which is absolutely terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming. Jacob told her about the ranch, about his hopes to make it profitable again, to give Mary a secure future. Penelope told him about her clinic, about the people who depended on her, about her dream of training other women to be nurses and healers. What if you opened a clinic here? Jacob suggested. In Wyatt. Doc Thornton already said he could use a partner. The town is growing. They need medical care. But my patients in Springfield, Penelope protested. I cannot just abandon them. Could you train someone to take over? Jacob asked. Someone you trust to continue your work? Penelope was quiet for a long moment, considering. There is a young woman who has been apprenticing with me, she said slowly. Margaret. She is bright and capable and deeply committed to helping people. I had been thinking about taking her on as a full partner. Maybe this is the push I need to actually do it. Hope flared in Jacob's chest. So you will consider it? Staying in Wyatt? I will consider it, Penelope said, and then she laughed. Listen to me. Reorganizing my entire life for a man I met less than a week ago. My younger self would be scandalized. My younger self would be equally shocked, Jacob admitted. I had sworn off women entirely, told myself a cowboy life was simpler without romantic complications. How is that working out for you? Penelope asked with a teasing smile. Terribly, Jacob said, grinning back at her. Absolutely terribly. Another week passed before Doc Thornton declared Jacob fit enough to leave the boarding house, though with strict instructions to take things slowly. Jacob's first trip was home to the ranch, with Penelope insisting on accompanying him to ensure he did not overdo things. The ranch was a modest spread, about 200 acres of rolling Missouri grassland. The house was small but sturdy, built by Jacob's grandfather 40 years earlier. As they rode up in Penelope's wagon, Jacob tried to see it through her eyes and winced at what he saw. The barn needed fresh paint. The fences sagged in places. Several of the outbuildings looked ready to collapse. It needs work, Jacob said unnecessarily. A lot of work. It needs love, Penelope corrected gently. There is good bones here, Jacob. I can see it. Mary rushed out to meet them, throwing her arms around Jacob before he had even climbed down from the wagon. You are home, she said, relief evident in her voice. I have been so worried. I am fine, Jacob assured her, though he had to suppress a wince as her enthusiasm pulled at his still healing wound. Mary, this is Penelope Ellis. Penelope, my sister, Mary. The two women studied each other, and Jacob held his breath. Mary's opinion mattered to him, and he desperately wanted his sister and the woman he loved to get along. But Mary's face broke into a wide smile. Thank you for saving my brother, she said warmly. I do not know how to express what it means to me. Your brother is a fighter, Penelope said, returning the smile. He did half the work himself. That is generous, Jacob said. We all know I was half dead when you found me. Only half, Penelope said lightly. The other half was still quite stubbornly alive. Mary invited them inside for coffee, and they sat around the worn kitchen table while Jacob filled his sister in on his recovery. He noticed Penelope taking in every detail of the house, and again he felt self-conscious about its shabby state. The furniture was old, the curtains faded, the whole place carrying the air of neglect that had settled over it since their mother's death. Where is Papa? Jacob asked, noticing his father's absence. Mary's face fell. In town, I expect. At the saloon. He has been there most days since you got hurt. I think it scared him, Jacob. He will not talk about it, but I think it reminded him that he could lose you too. Jacob's jaw tightened with frustration and old anger. His father's way of dealing with fear was to drown it in whiskey, leaving Jacob to shoulder the burden of keeping their family afloat. But today, with Penelope beside him and hope kindling in his chest for the first time in years, he found he did not want to dwell on his father's failings. I need to talk to you about something, Jacob said to Mary, about the future of this ranch. He explained his conversation with Penelope about their desire to build a life together, about Penelope's idea to open a clinic in Wyatt. Mary listened intently, her face lighting up as Jacob spoke. This is wonderful, Mary said when he finished. Jacob, I have been so worried about you. You have been carrying everything alone for so long. Having someone to share the burden, someone who makes you happy, that is exactly what you need. It will mean changes, Jacob warned. We will need to work hard to make this ranch profitable again. And we will need to support Penelope's work. It will not be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Mary said, echoing words their mother used to say. Then she turned to Penelope. Will you really stay? You would give up your life in Springfield for us. Not give up, Penelope corrected. Transform. There is always need for healing, no matter where you are. And I think Wyatt could use a dedicated medical clinic. Doc Thornton is wonderful, but he is getting older. The town is growing. There is room for both of us to serve this community. They spent the afternoon walking the ranch, with Jacob showing Penelope every corner of the property, despite her protests that he should be resting. He wanted her to see it all, the good and the bad, to understand what she would be taking on if she chose this life with him. They stood on a small rise overlooking the creek that ran through the property, the autumn sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Penelope slipped her hand into Jacob's, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching the water flow past. I can see why you fight so hard to keep this place, Penelope said finally. It is beautiful, Wild and rough around the edges, but beautiful. Like you, Jacob said, and she laughed and swatted his arm. Smooth talker, she accused, but she was smiling. I try, Jacob said, pulling her closer. Penelope, are you certain about this? Really certain? Because once you commit to this, to me, to this life, I am not going to let you go easily. Good, Penelope said firmly, because I do not intend to go anywhere. I told you when I found you on that road that you were not dying, not if I had anything to say about it. Well, I say the same now about us. We are not failing, not giving up, not letting circumstances defeat us. We are building something here, Jacob, something real and lasting. You pulled me back from the edge once, Jacob said softly, turning to face her fully. And you keep doing it every day, not just from death, but from despair, from loneliness, from the belief that I had to face everything alone. Then we pull each other back, Penelope said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. That is what love is it not? Being someone's anchor when the storms come. Jacob kissed her then, slow and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Penelope rested her forehead against his. Marry me, Jacob said, the words tumbling out before he could think better of them. I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but marry me, Penelope. Be my wife, be my partner. Help me rebuild this ranch and this family and make something beautiful out of all this roughness. Penelope pulled back to look at him, her amber eyes searching his face. For a moment, Jacob thought he had ruined everything, pushed too hard, too fast. But then her face broke into the most brilliant smile he had ever seen. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you, Jacob Hawthorne, though you are right that it is absolutely crazy. The best things usually are, Jacob said, sweeping her up in his arms despite the protest from his still healing side. He spun her around once, both of them laughing like children, and then set her down carefully before the movement could aggravate his wound too much. They walked back to the house hand in hand, making plans as they went. They would get married in the spring, giving Penelope time to make arrangements for her clinic in Springfield, and for Jacob to get the ranch into better shape. In the meantime, Penelope would stay with her aunt in Wyatt and begin working with Doc Thornton to establish her practice in town. Mary was overjoyed at the news of their engagement, hugging them both and immediately beginning to plan the wedding, despite Penelope's protests that they had plenty of time. Even their father, when he finally stumbled home late that evening, seemed to rouse himself from his alcoholic fog long enough to shake Jacob's hand and offer his congratulations, though his eyes were sad. Your mother would have liked her, was all he said to Jacob, and then he retreated to his room. It was not much, but it was more than Jacob had gotten from his father in 2 years, and he chose to take it as a good sign. The next months were a whirlwind of activity. Penelope returned to Springfield to settle her affairs, and while she was gone, Jacob felt her absence like a physical ache, but she wrote to him nearly every day, long letters full of details about her life, her patience, her preparations to leave. Jacob treasured every word, reading and rereading them by lamplight until he had them memorized. In her absence, Jacob threw himself into improving the ranch. He repaired fences, painted buildings, cleared brush. Mary worked beside him, and slowly their father began to emerge from his grief-induced stupor to help as well. Jacob noticed that his father drank less when he was working, and he made sure to find tasks that needed doing every day. "Why are you doing this?" his father asked one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day of work. "Taking care of me, I mean. I have not been much of a father to you these past years." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because you are still my father," he said finally, "and because Penelope taught me something. She taught me not to give up on people, even when it seems hopeless. You gave up on yourself when Mama died, and I will not give up on you. Mary will not give up on you. But you have to start fighting again, Papa. For yourself. For us." His father's eyes were wet when he looked at Jacob. "I do not know if I remember how." "Then we will teach you," Jacob said firmly. "That is what family does." It was a start, and starts were something Jacob had learned to value. When Penelope returned to Wyatt 3 months later, it was with a wagon full of medical supplies and a heart full of determination. She had successfully transitioned her Springfield clinic to her apprentice Margaret, who had proven more than capable of carrying on the work. Doc Thornton had helped Penelope secure a small building on Main Street, and within a week of her return, she had opened the Wyatt Medical Clinic. The town embraced her immediately. Word spread quickly about the nurse who had saved Jacob Hawthorne's life, and people came from miles around to be treated by her. She charged on a sliding scale, accepting payment in whatever form people could manage. Sometimes it was money, sometimes livestock or grain, sometimes just labor to help improve the clinic or the ranch. Jacob helped her whenever he could, though his own work on the ranch kept him busy. But he made sure to stop by the clinic every evening to walk her home, and these walks became the highlight of his day. They would talk about their respective days, about their plans for the future, about nothing and everything. Sometimes they would stop by the creek or sit on the porch of her aunt's house, stealing kisses like teenagers and dreaming about the life they would build together. As winter gave way to spring, the ranch began to show real signs of recovery. Jacob had managed to purchase a small herd of cattle with money earned from odd jobs and help from friends in town. His father, while still struggling, had reduced his drinking significantly and was taking more interest in the daily operations of the ranch. Mary was flourishing, her natural optimism returning as hope took root in their family once more. And through it all, Penelope was there, a steady presence in Jacob's life. She celebrated his victories and supported him through his setbacks. When a late frost killed half their early crops, she held him while he raged at the unfairness of it all, and then helped him figure out a plan to recover. When her clinic struggled financially in its early months, he returned the favor, sitting with her late into the night as they worked through her accounts and found ways to economize. They were partners in the truest sense, and Jacob had never been happier. The wedding took place on a bright April morning in 1878. Nearly 7 months after the day Penelope had found Jacob bleeding on the road. The whole town turned out for the occasion, cramming into the small church to witness the union of the cowboy who had nearly died and the woman who had saved him. Penelope walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and Jacob felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a simple white dress, her dark hair crowned with wildflowers, and she had never looked more beautiful. But it was the look in her eyes as she met his gaze that nearly undid him. In those amber depths he saw love, yes, but also trust, commitment, and an unshakable certainty that they were doing the right thing. The ceremony was short and sweet. When it came time for Jacob to say his vows, he spoke from the heart. Penelope, you found me when I was lost, saved me when I was dying, and loved me when I thought I was beyond love. You are the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I have ever known. And I thank God every day that you happened to be traveling that road when you were. I promise to be your partner, your supporter, your friend. I promise to never let you face anything alone. I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live. There was not a dry eye in the church when he finished, and Penelope had to wipe away tears before she could speak her own vows. Jacob, I have spent my life fighting to save others, but I did not realize I needed saving too. You showed me that it is okay to need someone, to lean on someone, to build a life with someone. You are kind and strong and good, and I am honored to become your wife. I promise to stand beside you through every challenge. I promise to believe in us even when things seem impossible. I promise to pull you back from any edge you might face, just as you pull me back. And I promise to love you more with each passing day. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob pulled Penelope into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone present. The reception was held at the ranch, which looked better than it had in years, thanks to the combined efforts of Jacob, his father, Mary, and half the town. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by neighbors, and someone had brought a fiddle for dancing. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Jacob spun Penelope around the makeshift dance floor, both of them grinning like fools. Happy? He asked her during a quieter moment, when they had escaped the crowd for a few minutes of peace. Deliriously, Penelope said, resting her head on his shoulder, though I suspect life will get complicated quickly. Your ranch, my clinic, all the challenges we will face. Bring them on, Jacob said confidently. We can handle anything together. And they did. The first year of their marriage was not easy. The ranch struggled through a drought that summer, and Penelope's clinic faced resistance from some of the more traditional townsfolk who did not think a woman should be practicing medicine. But they faced each challenge as a team, supporting each other through the difficulties and celebrating the victories together. Jacob learned to help at the clinic when emergencies arose, his strong back and steady hands proving useful for holding patients or moving equipment. Penelope learned about ranching, and while she would never be a cowgirl, she developed a decent understanding of the business side of things and helped Jacob keep accurate books. Mary bloomed under their care, eventually falling in love with a young farmer named Thomas Wright, who Jacob approved of wholeheartedly. Their father continued his slow journey back from the brink, and while he never fully recovered the man he had been before his wife's death, he found a sort of peace in working the land and watching his children build their lives. 2 years into their marriage, Penelope discovered she was expecting their first child. Jacob was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, hovering over her constantly until she finally threatened to ban him from the clinic if he did not calm down. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him with amusement. "I am a nurse. I know what to expect." "But you are my wife," Jacob protested. "How am I supposed to remain calm about that?" "By trusting me," Penelope said gently. "By believing that we will handle this just like we have handled everything else, together." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1880, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to anyone within earshot. Jacob held his son for the first time with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he marveled at the tiny, perfect features. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, tired but radiant despite the ordeal of labor. "Henry," Jacob said immediately. "Henry Hawthorne, after your father who encouraged you to become a healer. Without his support, you might never have been on that road to save me, and none of this would exist." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect," she whispered. Henry was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a bright-eyed toddler. He would toddle between the ranch and the clinic, equally comfortable among the horses and in the medical supply room. Jacob and Penelope marveled at him constantly, this little person they had created together, this living symbol of their love. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Ruth, after Jacob's mother. Ruth was quieter than her brother, more contemplative, but she had her mother's steady determination and her father's kind heart. The ranch house that had once felt empty and sad now rang with laughter and the chaos of children. Penelope continued her work at the clinic even after becoming a mother, though she scaled back her hours somewhat. She trained 2 young women from town as nursing assistants, teaching them everything she knew and building the kind of medical practice she had always dreamed of. The clinic became a cornerstone of the community, and Penelope's reputation as a skilled and compassionate healer spread throughout the region. Jacob's ranch prospered as well, though it was never without challenges. There were good years and hard years, droughts and floods, booms and busts. But through it all, he and Penelope faced things together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. Mary married her Thomas and moved to a neighboring farm, though she visited often and remained close with her brother. Jacob's father lived to meet his grandchildren and to see the ranch restored to something resembling prosperity. He died peacefully in his sleep one night when Henry was 5 and Ruth was 3, and while Jacob grieved, he also felt grateful that his father had found some measure of peace before the end. The years flowed past like the creek that ran through their property, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Henry grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, while Ruth discovered a passion for healing and began training with her mother at the clinic. More children came, 2 more sons and another daughter, filling the house with noise and love. Jacob and Penelope grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They still took walks in the evening when they could, still held hands like young sweethearts, still looked at each other with the same wonder that had filled them in those early days. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Jacob took Penelope back to the spot where she had found him all those years ago. The road looked different now, better maintained, but the memories were as vivid as ever. "I was so close to giving up," Jacob said, standing on the very spot where he had fallen. "I had convinced myself that death was inevitable, that there was no point in fighting anymore." "I am very glad you were wrong," Penelope said, slipping her hand into his. "I am glad you would not let me give up," Jacob countered. "You pulled me back from the edge, Penelope, not just that day, but every day since. You saved my life in more ways than one." "And you saved mine," Penelope said softly. "I was so focused on helping everyone else that I had forgotten to live my own life. You reminded me that it is okay to need someone, to love someone, to build something just for yourself." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Missouri hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Behind them lay 25 years of partnership, of love, of building a life together. Ahead lay whatever the future might bring, but they would face it together, just as they always had. "No regrets?" Jacob asked, pulling Penelope close. "Not a single one," Penelope said firmly. "You?" "Only that I did not meet you sooner," Jacob said. "But I suppose everything happens in its own time." "Providence," Penelope said, echoing the word she had used on that first day. "I think I do believe in Providence after all. How else do you explain me being on that exact road at that exact moment? How else do you explain two people who needed each other, finding each other against all odds?" "I do not know," Jacob admitted, "but I am grateful for it every single day." They walked back to the wagon hand in hand, the same wagon Penelope had been driving that fateful day, now old but still serviceable. As they rode home in the gathering dusk, Jacob thought about how close he had come to never experiencing any of this. Never knowing Penelope's love, never building a family, never finding the happiness that now filled every corner of his life. He had thought he was dying that day on the road, had been certain his story was over. But Penelope had appeared like an answer to a prayer he had not known he was making, and she had pulled him back from the edge, not just from death, but from a life of loneliness and despair and shouldering everything alone. They arrived home to find their house blazing with light and full of noise. Henry was there with his new wife, and Ruth had brought her young man to meet the family. The younger children were running around, getting underfoot and creating cheerful chaos. Mary and Thomas had come for dinner, and the table was set for a celebration. "Ready to face the madness?" Penelope asked with a smile as they sat in the wagon, watching the scene through the windows. "Always," Jacob said, "as long as I am facing it with you." They climbed down from the wagon and walked into the warmth and light of their home, into the life they had built together from that single moment of grace on a dusty Missouri road. Behind them, the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, constant and steady, watching over the land and the people who loved it. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Jacob and Penelope grew old together, their hair turning silver, their faces gaining the lines that spoke of laughter and tears and a life fully lived. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading wide and deep across Missouri. The ranch passed to Henry, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown, while Ruth took over the clinic when Penelope finally decided to retire at the age of 65. But retirement for Penelope meant simply working fewer hours, not stopping entirely. She could still be found at the clinic several days a week, training new nurses and sharing her wealth of knowledge with anyone who would listen. Jacob and Penelope spent their later years, much as they had spent their earlier ones, working together, supporting each other, enjoying the simple pleasures of shared meals and quiet evenings, and the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. They took walks every evening, moving slower now, but no less steady, their hands still finding each other automatically. On a warm summer evening in 1903, when Jacob was 77 and Penelope was 73, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over land that had been in Jacob's family for 3 generations now. Their children and grandchildren had gathered for a Sunday dinner, and the sounds of family filled the air around them. "Do you ever think about that day?" Jacob asked, as he had asked countless times over the years. "The day you found me?" "Every day of my life," Penelope said, just as she always did. "It was the day everything changed, the day I found my purpose, my partner, my home." "I was so certain I was dying," Jacob mused. "I had given up, accepted it. And then you appeared, and you just refused to let death have me. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself." "Because I could see it," Penelope said softly. "Even then, bleeding and broken on that road, I could see the life you still had left to live. I could see the man you were meant to be. I could not let that be wasted." "I love you," Jacob said, turning to look at his wife. Her face was lined now, her dark hair gone to silver, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "I have loved you from the moment you leaned over me and told me I was not dying. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Penelope said, reaching over to take his hand. My stubborn cowboy who refused to stay down even when he should have. My partner, my dearest friend, the love of my life. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in glorious colors. Around them, their family laughed and talked, building their own memories, writing their own stories. But it had all started here, with a cowboy who thought he was dying, and a woman who appeared on a dusty road and pulled him back from the edge. Jacob lived another 2 years, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79. Penelope held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke at the loss, she also felt profound gratitude for the 50 years they had been given together. She lived another 5 years after that, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and started on their own paths, long enough to ensure the clinic was in capable hands, long enough to finish the story she and Jacob had started together. When she finally passed, on a spring morning, much like the one when she and Jacob had married, her children found a letter she had left for them. In it, she told the story of that day on the road, of finding their father bleeding and dying, of refusing to accept that his story was over. She wrote about love and partnership, about the importance of fighting for people even when they cannot fight for themselves, about building a life of purpose and meaning. "Your father and I were given a gift," she wrote in her careful hand. "The gift of time, of love, of partnership. We nearly lost it before it even began, but we were given a second chance, and we made the most of every moment. I hope you will do the same. Fight for what matters. Love fiercely. Never give up on people or on yourself. And remember that sometimes when we are at our lowest, that is exactly when grace appears to pull us back from the edge." The letter became a family treasure, passed down through generations, along with the story of Jacob and Penelope, the cowboy and the nurse whose love story began with a rescue on a Missouri road. The ranch remained in the family, as did the clinic, both serving as testaments to what two people could build when they refused to give up on each other or on life itself. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Missouri hills and painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, it was said that if you stood very still in just the right spot on the old road outside of Wyatt, you could almost see them, a cowboy and a nurse, hand in hand, walking together into the sunset they had earned through love, perseverance, and the simple refusal to let death or despair have the final word. Their story became legend in Wyatt and the surrounding country, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who had known them, for the family they left behind, it was simply the truth of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful out of that finding. The ranch house still stood, generations later, solid and weathered and full of the echoes of laughter and love. The clinic still served the community, bearing Penelope's name and carrying on her legacy of compassionate care. And in the small cemetery behind the church where they had been married, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the final resting place of Jacob and Penelope Hawthorne. On Jacob's stone were carved the words, "He lived because she refused to let him die." On Penelope's stone were carved the words, "She found her home in saving him." And between them, carved into the base of both stones, was a single line that told their entire story. Together, they pulled each other back from every edge and built a love that lasted beyond time. It was a fitting end to a story that had nearly ended before it began, on a dusty Missouri road in the autumn of 1877. A story of a cowboy who thought he was dying until a woman appeared and pulled him back from the edge. A story of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, nurtured through challenges and hardships, and allowed to bloom into something that changed not just 2 lives, but generations. And so, the story ended where the best stories do, with love triumphant, with lives well lived, with a legacy that endured. Jacob and Penelope had been given the gift of each other, and they had honored that gift by building a life of purpose, partnership, and profound love. Their descendants carried that legacy forward, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation that had been laid by a cowboy and a nurse on a road outside of Wyatt, Missouri. The sun set on their story, as it had set on countless evenings of their life together, painting the sky in glorious colors, promising that even as one day ended, another would begin. And in that promise was the heart of their story, the truth they had lived and embodied and passed down through their family, that it is never too late for grace, never too late for love, never too late to be pulled back from the edge and given another chance at life. Jacob had thought he was dying, had been certain his story was over. But Penelope appeared, refused to accept that ending, and together they wrote a new story entirely. A story of healing and hope, of partnership and perseverance, of love that conquered death and despair and time itself. It was, in the end, exactly the story they both deserved. The story of two people who needed each other, finding each other against all odds. The story of a love that began with a rescue and grew into something that changed the world, at least for all the people lucky enough to be touched by it. And in Wyatt, Missouri, in the hearts of the people who remembered them, and in the legacy they left behind, Jacob and Penelope Hawthorne lived on. Their love story eternal, their example enduring, their impact immeasurable. The cowboy and the nurse, the dying man and the woman who saved him. The partners who built a life and a love that would be remembered and celebrated for generations to come.